This is the first of Beethoven's Opus 126 bagatelles, some of the last music he wrote before he died. Except, it sucks. I rewrote it so that it sucks. Let me back up a little. See, I've been playing these bagatelles for some years now, and they definitely don't suck. In fact, despite the fact that the word bagatelle suggests a trivial little piece, this is some of the most imaginative music that Beethoven wrote, up there with his most famous piano sonatas. The problem is, what makes this music special is subtle, especially to modern ears that haven't grown up with the underlying forms and conventions. So I thought, what better way to appreciate what Beethoven wrote than to consider it in relation to what he might have written if he were just kind of mediocre. And so I present to you the first of these 6 bagatelles, rewritten so that it's unimaginative, uninspired, and underwhelming. Let's start with the opening phrase. Now, obviously I could have recomposed this and the whole piece to make it sound like a 2-year-old banging on the piano. But that wasn't my goal here. What I really wanted to do was to recompose the music so that it still sounds like Beethoven, but a little dead in the eyes. Here's how that turned out. What do you think? Is the difference dramatic or subtle? If it feels a little subtle, just wait for the second half. So what does Beethoven do differently? Well, for one thing, instead of just adding chords that match the rhythm of the right hand, he gives the left hand a constant quarter note pulse. These pulsing notes also incorporate a dominant pedal point, which means that whatever the harmony above, there's always a low D underneath. Both these details lend the music a kind of suspended feeling. Now take a listen to the tenor part. In my version, it's nothing special, just a byproduct of the harmony. But Beethoven shapes it into a true counter-melody, with a sense of tension and release. Oh, and did you hear that? Was that a D minor triad? In G major? That's weird. See, Beethoven could have easily gone straight to the F sharp, like this. Or if he wanted to keep the quarter note pulse, perhaps he could have added an appoggiatura leaning down from the G. But no, he chooses to go through the F natural, which briefly makes a D minor triad, a strange chord to find in G major. Now to be clear, this isn't a functional chord, it's just a colorful harmonic inflection, a kind of mirage of D minor on the way from one chord to the next. This is a trick that Beethoven uses elsewhere in the same set of bagatelles. Take this wild moment in the second bagatelle, for example. The true underlying harmony is a D dominant 7th followed by a B diminished 7th, which is pretty normal actually. But by wiggling one of the voices chromatically, Beethoven gives us fleeting impressions of strange harmonies like F sharp minor and D flat 7. Anyway, back to the D minor triad. It's a small thing, but it's the kind of detail that makes this more than just an ordinary bagatelle. Moving forward, my sucky version continues like this. Beethoven's version, on the other hand, continues like this. One key difference is Beethoven's use of suspensions, like this one. Do you hear how that G really wants to fall down to an F sharp? A good suspension stretches like a rubber band. Relaxed, stretched, relaxed. Beethoven weaves suspensions and appoggiaturas like this throughout the bagatelle, most of which I removed because they didn't suck. He also does something subtle in the meter at the end of the phrase. Here's my boring version. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And here's Beethoven's version. 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Did you hear how these last 2 bars feel a bit like 3 groups of 2 rather than 2 groups of 3? This is called a hemiola. Without going into too much detail here, the word hemiola refers to the basic polyrhythm of 3 against 2, an effect that shows up in all sorts of cultures and time periods, from music of the African diaspora to early Western manuscripts in which the notes were colored red to indicate that they're sung 1.5 times as fast. The specific kind of hemiola Beethoven's using here, though, is reminiscent of the hornpipe from Handel's Water Music, where a hemiola occurs right at the end of the phrase to set up the cadence. Let's listen back to the bagatelle. Do you hear the similarity? The key is the empty downbeat and the emphasis on beat 2 of the second measure. It's a subtle thing perhaps, but this video is all about subtleties. So anyway, that's the opening phrase in excessive detail. In both my sucky bagatelle and Beethoven's original version, the second phrase is a varied repetition of the first. In my version, I limited this variation to the very end of the phrase, adding a few more eighth notes and resolving the melody with Ti-Do instead of Re-Do. Beethoven takes the variation much further, subdividing the accompaniment into eighth notes and adding these beautiful trills that propel the melody into the downbeat. In the second half of the phrase, it's the melody that's subdivided, intensifying the suspensions. The opening phrase and its varied repetition make up the first half of the bagatelle. And before we talk about the second half, let's zoom out and talk a little bit about the overall form, which I would call a rounded binary form. Two of the most simple forms in classical music are the binary and ternary form. A binary form is in 2 parts, A, B. A ternary form is in 3 parts, A, B, A, with the last part being a repeat of the first part. The repeat of the last part helps to round things out and give the music a sense of coming full circle. Because this feeling of rounding things out was seen as desirable, a hybrid form emerged called rounded binary. You start with a simple binary form, but at the end of the B section, you bring back the A material, either in whole or in part. Wait, but isn't that just a ternary form? Well, not exactly. The difference is that in a ternary form, the B section stands on its own much more, whereas in a rounded binary form, it flows more directly into the return of the A material. It's also a common practice to repeat the sections of a binary form, sometimes with added variation, which helps a lot to hold this A-B block together. So, coming back to our bagatelle, the A section was just our opening phrase, and we also did the customary repeat of that A section, adding a little bit of variation. So it's time to dive into the B material, and the second half of the form. Generally, the second half of a binary form like this starts in a different related key. Since this bagatelle is in G major, the natural choice is D major, the dominant, which is exactly where Beethoven's version and my sucky version start the second half. Here's my version. And here's Beethoven's version, which is of course better, for similar reasons as before. Okay, nothing too dramatic yet, but we're approaching the pivotal moment in the form where we bring back the opening material in the original key. The moment of anticipation before the return is typically the most exciting moment in the piece, often featuring a prolonged dominant 7th chord. In my version, I build a little momentum by alternating between A7 and D before finally landing on D dominant 7 with a flourish that brings us back to the opening phrase. It's not bad, probably because I modeled this harmonic progression on Beethoven's, but he takes it so much further, building up the rhythmic energy in several steps. First, he shortens the bar length to 2/4. Then he adds triplets. Then 16ths. Then syncopation. And finally, all of this energy spills into a series of trills over a D dominant 7th. Oh, and remember the little flourish from my version? In Beethoven's version, it goes like this. Wow. By the way, this is totally characteristic of late Beethoven. At times the music is so simple and concise, but at other times what could have been a short transition blows up into an enormous fugue or cadenza. As another example, listen to the opening theme of his late piano sonata, Opus 109. That's it. That's the entire first theme and transition into the second theme. But then the second theme expands out into this wild improvisatory cadenza. You can even see this process at work between the movements of a larger form. Look at the variation in length between these movements from his late string quartets. Anyway, have you had a chance to settle down at all from that wildness? Let's continue with the final return to the A section. In my sucky version, I play it cool. For the most part, it's just a direct repeat of the opening, but we have to do something at the end to give it a sense of finality. So I decided to take this measure and repeat it up a step with an applied dominant to the 2 chord before resolving to the final 5-1. The G sharp in the melody helps add some extra tension, and I even allowed myself a little suspension, which perhaps doesn't suck as much as it's supposed to. But hey, I couldn't resist. Anyway, let's rewind and see what Beethoven does with the final A section. Did you notice where the melody was? Listen to the bass line. Isn't that great? Next, Beethoven gives us an elaborate contrapuntal version of the theme. Notice how this variation of the theme accordions outward, giving us a dramatic stretch between low and high register. This unusual combination of extreme highs and lows is another characteristic of late Beethoven. For example, listen to this famous moment from the last piano sonata, Opus 111. Anyway, this is the point in the form where my sucky version ends. The theme has been restated and the binary form rounded off. But Beethoven's not done yet, and offers us a little coda. You might have noticed that the very end of this closing theme mirrors the ending of the opening phrase. There are also other elements helping to tie the whole movement together, but mostly I just marvel at the simplicity of these dovetailing descending and ascending scales. Why does it seem to encapsulate the whole movement so beautifully? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Anyway, zooming out, what was the point of all of this? Well, one of the things that good music does is play with our expectations. If a chord resolves in a funny way, or a phrase lasts an extra measure, we notice, even if unconsciously, because we're so familiar with the conventions. But a couple hundred years removed from Beethoven's music, we don't have as good a sense of the conventions anymore, and so it can be easy to miss the special moments that creatively deviate from these conventions. My hope is that my mediocre version of this bagatelle has helped you connect with the conventions a little better, and therefore to appreciate the way that Beethoven dances around them. When I was first entering graduate school for music, I had to take a music history placement exam. And so to prepare for it, I read through the textbook version of Taruskin's History of Western Music from cover to cover. I still remember how, while I was immersing myself in that textbook, music from 500 or 600 years ago felt fresh and vivid in a way that it hadn't before. It makes you wonder what other aspects of music and life in general are like this, opening themselves up to us only when we take the time to immerse ourselves. Anyway, David, did this experiment work for you? Did you hear something new in Beethoven that you hadn't appreciated before? Oh, and do you want to hear a sucky version of any other composers? Let me know in the comments. Finally, since I've been talking over it this whole video, Here is a complete performance of my sucky bagatelle and Beethoven's not-so-sucky bagatelle. Oh hey, one last thing. A PDF of my sucky bagatelle is available for free on my Patreon in case you want to try it for yourself. Also, I teach private lessons in composition, piano, and music programming, so if this video inspired you at all, a link is in the description. Okay, here's the music.